Prince Zyreth of House Drakmar stood in the center of the ceremonial arena, surrounded by hundreds of dragon nobles who had gathered to witness what should have been his moment of triumph. The ancient stone walls reflected the flickering torchlight, casting dancing shadows across the faces of those watching. At 17 solar cycles old, this was supposed to be the day he proved himself worthy of his bloodline. This was supposed to be the day he showed everyone that the heir to House Drakmar could command the flames like his ancestors before him. But as Zyreth opened his mouth and tried to summon the fire that should have been burning in his chest, nothing happened. Not even a spark. Not even a wisp of smoke. Just cold, empty air that seemed to mock everything his family stood for. The silence in the arena was deafening. Then came the whispers, growing louder with each passing second. Dragon nobles leaned toward each other, their voices carrying across the space despite their attempts at discretion. Some laughed openly, not even bothering to hide their amusement at his failure. This wasn't the first time Zyreth had stood before the council unable to produce fire. It was the third time. And everyone knew that 3 failures meant something far worse than embarrassment. Elder Morvax, the head of the Council of Flames, shook his massive horned head in disappointment. The old dragon had known Zyreth since he was a hatchling, had taught his father and grandfather before him. The look in Morvax's ancient eyes hurt worse than any insult the other nobles could throw. From the royal observation platform, King Varoth watched his only son with an expression that had grown increasingly distant over the past year. The king's massive form seemed to slump slightly as he turned away, unable to watch anymore. Zyreth felt that rejection like a physical blow. His father hadn't spoken directly to him in weeks, communicating only through advisors and servants. The message was clear enough without words. The other young dragons in attendance weren't as subtle as their elders. Prince Karveth of House Scorchwind, a dragon known for his exceptional fire mastery, called out from the crowd. His voice dripped with mock concern that fooled absolutely nobody. "Perhaps the Cold Prince needs more time to find his spark," Karveth announced, and his followers erupted in laughter. The nickname had stuck months ago, and Zyreth heard it everywhere he went now. The Cold Prince. A dragon who couldn't breathe fire. It was like being a bird who couldn't fly or a fish who couldn't swim. He was broken, defective, wrong. Lady Cynthia of House Emberclaw, a dragon noble his own age who he'd once considered a friend, wouldn't even meet his eyes anymore. She stood with the other young nobles, carefully positioned as far from him as possible. Association with failure was apparently contagious in dragon society. As the council dismissed the gathering, declaring the ceremony concluded without success, Zyreth didn't wait for the formal exit processional. He turned and fled, his claws scraping against the polished stone floors as he ran. Behind him, he could hear the conversation starting up again, louder now that he was leaving. They were already discussing what would happen next. Dragon law was clear. A prince who couldn't breathe fire by his 18th cycle forfeited his claim to his family's territory. Zyreth had less than a year to figure out what was wrong with him, or House Drakmar would lose everything. He ran through the palace corridors, past servants who quickly averted their eyes, past guards who suddenly found the walls fascinating. Everyone knew. Everyone pitied him or mocked him, and he wasn't sure which was worse. His chest felt tight, his throat burned with the effort of holding back emotions that dragons weren't supposed to show. Dragons were meant to be proud, fierce, powerful. He was none of those things. Zyreth found himself in the eastern wing of the palace, an area that had fallen into disuse decades ago. The old archives were housed here, thousands of ancient texts and scrolls that nobody bothered to read anymore. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled of old parchment and neglect. It was perfect. Nobody came here. Nobody would see him break down like some weak hatchling. He slumped against a massive bookshelf, sliding down until he sat on the cold stone floor. His wings drooped behind him, and for the first time since the ceremony began, he let himself feel the full weight of his failure. What was wrong with him? He'd tried everything the Firemasters suggested. He'd studied the ancient techniques, practiced the breathing exercises they prescribed, meditated on the flame like they instructed. Nothing worked. The other young dragons made it look effortless, like fire was as natural as breathing. For Zyreth, it felt like trying to grasp smoke. That's when he heard it. A sound he'd never encountered before, echoing through the empty halls of the archive. Someone was whistling. The melody was simple and cheerful, completely at odds with the gloomy atmosphere of the Forgotten Wing. Zyreth lifted his head, curious despite himself. A human walked around the corner, pushing a cleaning cart and carrying a mop. He was whistling while he worked, seemingly unbothered by the dust or the isolation or the fact that he was in one of the most ancient parts of the Dragon Palace. The human wore the simple uniform of the palace maintenance staff, and there was something refreshingly ordinary about him. He noticed Xyrath sitting against the bookshelf and paused mid-whistle. "Hey there," the human said, his voice friendly and casual in a way that caught Xyrath completely off guard. "Didn't expect to find anyone down here. You okay, kid?" Xyrath stared at him. When was the last time someone had asked if he was okay? When was the last time someone had spoken to him like he was just a regular person instead of a disappointing prince? The human didn't seem to recognize him, or if he did, he didn't care about royal protocol. "I'm Dave," the human continued, leaning his mop against the wall. "Dave Mitchell. Started working here about 2 weeks ago through the Galactic Labor Exchange Program. These archives are part of my route." He gestured around at the dusty shelves. "Not many people come down here, so I usually have the place to myself. Good for thinking, you know?" Something about Dave's relaxed demeanor, his complete lack of judgment or expectation, made Xyrath's carefully maintained walls crack just a little. And for the first time in months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could talk to someone without being measured against impossible standards. "Rough day?" Dave asked, sitting down on his cleaning cart like it was the most natural thing in the world to chat with a dragon prince in a dusty archive. Xyrath found himself nodding before he could stop himself. And somehow, that simple acknowledgement felt like the first honest thing he'd done all day. Dave Mitchell looked at the young dragon slumped against the bookshelf and recognized that particular expression immediately. He'd seen it on his nephew's face back on Earth, seen it on his younger sister's face during her college years, heck, he'd probably worn it himself more times than he cared to admit. It was the look of someone who felt like they'd let everyone down, like they were somehow fundamentally broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. "You know what?" Dave said, hopping off his cleaning cart and walking over to sit on an old wooden crate a few feet away from the dragon. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. Sometimes it just helps to sit with someone who isn't going to judge you." Xyrath appreciated that more than he could express. But after a few moments of silence, the words started tumbling out anyway. Maybe it was because Dave was a stranger. Maybe it was because he was human and didn't understand dragon politics. Or maybe it was just because Xyrath was so tired of carrying this burden alone. "I can't breathe fire," Xyrath said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every dragon in my bloodline manifested their flames by age 15. My father did it at 13. His father at 14. I'm 17 and I can't produce even a spark. They call me the Cold Prince now." Dave nodded slowly, not interrupting, just listening. It was such a simple thing, but Xyrath couldn't remember the last time someone had really listened to him without immediately offering criticism or advice or disappointment. "The Fire Masters say I'm blocking myself somehow," Xyrath continued. "They've had me doing meditation exercises, breathing techniques, visualization practices. Nothing works. There's something wrong with me, and I don't know how to fix it." His voice cracked slightly on those last words. Dave was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said something Xyrath didn't expect. "Can I show you something? It might sound weird, but just hear me out." Xyrath nodded, curious despite his misery. Dave stood up and pursed his lips. Then he whistled a short, cheerful melody that bounced off the archive walls. The sound was clear and pleasant, almost musical. When he finished, he grinned at Xyrath. "You know what I just did?" Dave asked. "I controlled my breathing, shaped my mouth in a specific way, positioned my tongue just right, and pushed air through at exactly the right speed and pressure. It's all about control and relaxation at the same time. Sounds contradictory, right? But that's the trick." Xyrath tilted his head, confused. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with fire?" "Maybe everything," Dave said, settling back onto his crate. "Look, I don't know anything about dragon biology or magic or whatever makes fire happen for you guys. But I do know about pressure and expectations and how they can mess with your head. Back on Earth, my nephew Tommy wanted to learn how to whistle so bad. All his friends could do it, and he felt left out. Kid practiced for weeks and couldn't make a sound." Dave leaned forward, his expression warm and understanding. You know what his problem was? He was trying too hard. He was so stressed about not being able to do it that he was tensing up every muscle in his face and throat. His body was working against him because his mind was panicking. The more he failed, the more he stressed, and the more he stressed, the more he failed. Vicious cycle. Something about those words resonated deep in Xyrath's chest. That was exactly how he felt every time he stood before the Council of Flames. The weight of expectation, the fear of failure, the desperate need to prove himself. It all built up until his entire body felt like a coiled spring, tight and rigid and completely unable to relax. "So how did your nephew learn?" Xyrath asked. "I sat down with him one afternoon and we forgot about whistling entirely," Dave explained. "We just practiced breathing. Deep breaths from the belly, not shallow ones from the chest. I had him breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts. Got him relaxed first. Then we worked on just making air move through his lips in different ways. No pressure, no expectations. Just experimenting and playing around with it." Dave demonstrated, taking a slow, deep breath from his diaphragm. Xyrath could see his chest and stomach expand with the intake of air. Then Dave released it in a controlled stream, adjusting his lips to change the sound it made. Once Tommy stopped thinking of it as this huge impossible task and started thinking of it as just a fun thing to experiment with, it clicked. Took him maybe 20 minutes after that to get his first real whistle. Kid was so proud of himself he whistled for 3 days straight until his mom threatened to ground him. Despite everything, Xyrath felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. There was something about the way Dave told the story, so casual and warm and human, that made the crushing weight on his chest feel just a little bit lighter. "Here's what I'm thinking," Dave said, standing up and moving closer. "All those fire masters are probably teaching you dragon techniques that have worked for generations, right? Traditional methods, ancient wisdom, all that stuff." Xyrath nodded. "But maybe that's part of the problem," Dave suggested gently. "Maybe you need to come at this from a completely different angle. Forget about fire for a minute. Let's just work on breathing and control. No expectations, no pressure. Just you and me in this dusty old archive, making weird sounds and seeing what happens." It sounded absurd. Learning to whistle as a way to learn dragon fire breathing. Any of the fire masters would have laughed him out of their chambers for suggesting such a ridiculous idea. But then again, their traditional methods hadn't worked. Xyrath had nothing left to lose. "Okay," he said quietly. "Show me." Dave's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "All right, first thing. Put your hand here." He placed his hand on his own stomach, just below his ribcage. "When you breathe, I want you to feel this area expand. Not your chest, your belly. Most people breathe too shallow, especially when they're nervous. Dragons probably too, right?" Xyrath placed his clawed hand on his own chest and tried. His first few attempts were exactly what Dave described, shallow breaths that only filled the top of his lungs. It felt wrong and inefficient. "That's normal," Dave assured him. "You've probably been breathing like that for months because you're constantly tense. Here, try this. Breathe out completely first. Empty your lungs all the way. Then let the air naturally flow back in, and imagine it filling up from the bottom like water filling a container." Xyrath tried again. This time, he focused on emptying his lungs completely, then letting air flow in without forcing it. He felt his diaphragm expand, felt the breath go deeper than it had in months. Something about it felt right, like a muscle he'd forgotten he had suddenly remembering its purpose. "There you go," Dave said encouragingly. "That's it. Now do that a few more times. Just get comfortable with that feeling." They spent the next several minutes just breathing together, which would have seemed ridiculous to anyone watching. A human janitor and a dragon prince, sitting in an abandoned archive, practicing something as basic as breathing. But with each breath, Xyrath felt something shifting inside him. The constant tension he'd been carrying was starting to ease. His throat didn't feel quite so tight. His chest didn't feel quite so constricted. "Now," Dave said, "let's try making some sound with it. Don't worry about whistling yet. Just shape your mouth like this." He demonstrated, forming a small opening with his lips. "And push air through steadily. Not too hard, not too soft. Just steady and controlled." Xyrath mimicked the position, feeling slightly silly. He pushed air through his lips and produced a soft rushing sound. Not a whistle, not even close, but it was something. "Perfect," Dave said. "Now adjust your tongue position. Bring it up a little, create a smaller channel for the air to flow through." They experimented together, Dave patiently coaching while Xyrath tried different positions and pressures. It was frustrating at times, but Dave never showed disappointment. He treated every attempt like progress, every small change like a discovery. After what felt like an hour, Xyrath managed to produce a sound that was almost whistle-like. It was shaky and weak and died out after half a second, but it was undeniably there. "Yes!" Dave exclaimed, punching the air with genuine excitement. "That's it. You just whistled, kid." And in that moment, as that fragile little sound echoed through the archives, Xyrath felt something he hadn't felt in over a year. He felt hope. More than that, he felt something warm stirring in his chest, faint but unmistakable. Like a tiny ember, barely alive, but there. Retry S. The next evening, Xyrath found himself making excuses to leave the royal wing early. He told his attendants he needed time alone to study ancient texts, which wasn't entirely a lie. He was studying something, just not what they assumed. As he made his way through the palace corridors toward the Eastern Archives, his heart beat faster with something that felt suspiciously like excitement. It had been so long since he'd looked forward to anything. Dave was already there when Xyrath arrived, organizing dusty scrolls on a cart while humming another one of those earth tunes. When he saw the young dragon, his face broke into that easy, welcoming smile that never seemed forced or fake. "Hey, you came back," Dave said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Wasn't sure if you would. Figured you might have thought the whole whistling thing was too weird once you had time to think about it." "I've tried everything else," Xyrath admitted, settling down on the floor in what had become his usual spot. "Weird is starting to look pretty good to me." They fell into a routine that evening and every evening after that. Dave would finish his regular cleaning duties first, making sure everything looked proper in case any palace supervisors came checking. Then he'd wheel his cart into the archives, and the real work would begin. What started as simple breathing exercises gradually evolved into something more structured. Dave treated their sessions like training practice, which Xyrath appreciated. There was no pity in Dave's approach, no condescension. He was just a teacher working with a student, both of them trying to solve a problem together. The human had a way of breaking down complex things into simple, manageable steps that somehow never felt insulting. "All right, tonight we're going to work on sustained notes," Dave announced about a week into their practice. "It's not enough to just make the sound. You need to control it, maintain it, shape it. Watch this." Dave whistled a long, steady note that stayed perfectly even for at least 10 seconds before he let it fade away. Then he did it again, but this time he made the pitch go up and down smoothly, like a wave. "That's all breath control and muscle memory," Dave explained. "Your diaphragm is doing most of the work, but your lips and tongue are making tiny adjustments the whole time. You don't even think about it once you get the hang of it. It becomes automatic." Xyrath tried to mimic what Dave had done. His first attempt lasted maybe 3 seconds before the sound wavered and died out. His second attempt was even shorter. Frustration bubbled up in his chest, that familiar feeling of failure starting to creep back in. "Hey, none of that," Dave said, noticing the shift in Xyrath's expression immediately. "You're not failing. You're learning. There's a difference. My brother's kid, little guy named Leo, he tried to learn guitar last year. First month, he sounded like he was strangling a cat. But he kept at it, and now he can actually play a few songs. Progress isn't always fast, but that doesn't mean it's not happening." The human pulled over a crate and sat down, getting more comfortable. "Tell me something. When you try to breathe fire, what does it feel like? What's happening in your body?" Xyrath thought about it, really thought about it for maybe the first time. Usually when he attempted fire breathing, he was so caught up in the fear of failure that he didn't pay attention to what was actually happening physically. "It's like there's something there," Xyrath said slowly, trying to find the right words. "Like a warmth in my chest. But it's blocked somehow. The fire masters say I need to channel it up through my throat and out, but whenever I try, everything just seizes up. It's like my body won't cooperate." "Because you're forcing it," Dave said with sudden understanding. "You're trying to push through the block instead of releasing it. It's like trying to force a door open when you should be unlocking it first." He stood up and started pacing, that look on his face that meant he was working through an idea. "Okay, here's what we're going to try. Forget about the fire completely. Don't even think about it. Just focus on the breathing, the control, the flow. Let's build that muscle memory until it's second nature. Your body knows what to do, we just need to teach it how to relax enough to do it." Over the following weeks, their sessions became more intense but also more natural. Dave would whistle patterns and have Xyrath copy them. Simple melodies at first, just 3 or 4 notes. Then longer sequences, more complex rhythms. Sometimes they'd practice for hours, the sound of their whistling echoing through the empty archives like some strange duet between species. Dave started teaching Xyrath actual Earth songs. Simple ones at first, like children's tunes that Dave said he learned when he was young. "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" was Xyrath's first complete song, and the sense of accomplishment he felt when he whistled it all the way through without stopping was surprisingly powerful. "You're getting really good at this," Dave said one evening, about 3 weeks into their practice. "Your control is solid now. You could probably out-whistle half the people back on Earth. But it was more than just the whistling, and both of them knew it. That warmth in Xyrath's chest that he'd mentioned was growing stronger with each session. It wasn't blocking up anymore when he practiced. Instead, it seemed to flow along with his breathing, rising and falling with each note he whistled. Sometimes, when he held a particularly long note, Xyrath swore he could feel heat building in his throat. He didn't mention it to Dave at first, too afraid that acknowledging it might make it disappear. But the humans seemed to notice anyway. Dave had a way of picking up on things without them needing to be said out loud. "That feeling in your chest," Dave said one evening, not quite looking at Xyrath, focusing instead on organizing some scrolls. "It's getting stronger, isn't it?" Xyrath nodded slowly. "How did you know?" "Because you whistle differently now," Dave explained. "There's a warmth to the sound that wasn't there before. I'm no expert on dragon biology, but I'm guessing that warmth isn't just metaphorical." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Dave added, "You know what I think? I think the fire was always there. You just needed to stop being afraid of it. Stop trying to control it with force and start guiding it with intention. All those breathing exercises, the whistling, the practice. We weren't teaching your body something new. We were just reminding it how to relax." Xyrath felt something click into place with those words. All the traditional dragon training had focused on power, on commanding the flames, on forcing them to obey his will. But fire wasn't something to be dominated. It was something to be understood, worked with, guided. Just like breath through lips to create a whistle. "Try something for me," Dave said, an excited gleam in his eye. "Whistle one of the songs we've been practicing, but this time, really feel that warmth in your chest. Don't push it, don't force it. Just let it be part of the sound you're making." Xyrath chose "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star," because it was the one he knew best. He took a deep breath from his diaphragm, just like Dave had taught him. He shaped his mouth, positioned his tongue, and began to whistle. But this time, instead of ignoring that warmth in his chest, he acknowledged it. He let it flow with his breath, let it become part of the melody. The sound that came out was different. Warmer, richer, with an almost musical quality that went beyond simple whistling. And his throat, for the first time in his life, felt genuinely warm. Not burning, not painful, just warm. Like something was finally waking up after a long sleep. When the song ended, both of them sat in stunned silence. "Did you feel that?" Dave asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Xyrath breathed. "Yes, I felt it." Dave's grin could have lit up the entire archive. "Kid, I think you've been breathing fire all along. You just didn't know it yet. The only difference between what you just did and actual dragon fire is probably just temperature and intention. And if you can control one, you can control the other." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Xyrath felt genuine hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of someone drowning. Real, solid hope built on progress and practice and the patience of a human janitor who saw potential where everyone else saw failure. They practiced late into the night, Xyrath whistling song after song, feeling that warmth build with each one. And somewhere in the forgotten archives of the Dragon Palace, the Cold Prince began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't broken after all. The announcement came during the morning meal, delivered by a royal courier who strode into the dining hall with all the formality that bad news seemed to require. Prince Karveth of House Scorchwind would arrive in 3 days to formally challenge Xyrath for House Drakmor's ancestral territory. By dragon law, it was his right. A prince who couldn't manifest fire by his 18th cycle was considered unfit to hold land, and Xyrath's 18th cycle was now less than 2 months away. King Varoth received the news with barely a flicker of emotion, simply nodding his massive head in acceptance. He didn't even look at Xyrath. The message was clear enough without words. His father had already given up, already accepted that they would lose everything because of his failure of a son. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that Xyrath wasn't part of. Servants rushed about getting the ceremonial arena ready. Diplomats arrived from various dragon houses, eager to witness what would likely be a historic transfer of power. The palace buzzed with activity and gossip, and everywhere Xyrath went, conversations stopped when he approached. He was the scandal of the season, the prince who would lose his kingdom without even putting up a fight. Xyrath tried to continue his evening practice sessions with Dave, but his concentration was shattered. On the second night before the challenge, he couldn't even manage a simple whistle. His throat was tight, his breathing shallow and panicked. Every technique Dave had taught him seemed to evaporate from his mind like morning mist. "I can't do this," Xyrath said, his voice breaking. "I've been fooling myself. Whistling isn't fire breathing. I'm going to stand in that arena tomorrow and fail just like I always do, and my father will lose everything because of me. Dave set down the scroll he'd been pretending to organize and came over to sit beside the young dragon. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, present and calm in a way that somehow made the panic in Xyrath's chest ease just slightly. "Can I tell you about the worst day of my life?" Dave finally asked. Xyrath looked at him, surprised by the question. "I was 19 years old, working construction with my dad," Dave continued, his voice quiet but steady. "It was supposed to be a simple job, just regular maintenance on a building downtown. But there was a gas leak nobody knew about. When my dad went to check the furnace, there was an explosion." Dave's hands clasped together, and Xyrath noticed they were shaking slightly. He survived, but he was hurt bad. Burns all over his arms and chest. "And you know what I did? I froze. Completely froze. Couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't help. My brain just shut down from the panic. Another worker had to pull my dad out while I just stood there like a statue." "Dave, Xyrath started, but the human held up a hand. "I'm telling you this because I know what it feels like to be paralyzed by fear," Dave said. "I know what it's like to feel like you're going to fail when everything's on the line. After that day, I couldn't go back to construction work. Every time I tried, I'd have a panic attack. Thought I was broken, thought I'd never be able to work with my hands again." He looked directly at Xyrath, his eyes serious but kind. "But here's what I learned. That fear, that panic, it was my body trying to protect me. It wasn't the enemy. It was just doing its job badly. Once I understood that, once I learned to work with it instead of fighting it, things changed. Took me 2 years of practice and patience, but I got past it." Dave stood up and started pacing, the way he did when he was working through something important. "You've been fighting yourself this whole time, Xyrath. Fighting the fear, fighting the pressure, fighting your own body. But everything we've practiced these past weeks, it's all been about the opposite. About relaxing, about trusting, about letting go." "But what if it doesn't work?" Xyrath whispered. "What if I get in that arena and nothing happens?" "Then nothing happens," Dave said with a shrug that seemed almost too casual for the situation. "But here's the thing, kid. You've already done the impossible. 4 weeks ago, you couldn't whistle a single note. Tonight, even scared out of your mind, you managed 3 before you lost it. That's progress. That's proof that you're not broken." Dave walked over and knelt down so he was at eye level with Xyrath. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. You've been breathing fire for weeks now. Not dragon fire maybe, but fire nonetheless. That warmth you feel, that heat in your throat when you whistle, that's real. That's your fire. The only difference between what you're doing now and what you need to do tomorrow is intention." "Intention?" Xyrath repeated. "Yeah. Right now, when you whistle, you're intending to make sound. Tomorrow, you'll intend to make fire. Same control, same breathing, same flow. Just a different goal." Dave smiled. "Think about it. What's fire? It's heat and energy moving through air. What's whistling? It's air moving in a controlled way. You've already mastered the hard part, the control. Now you just need to add the heat that's already there in your chest." Xyrath wanted to believe him. More than anything, he wanted to believe that it could be that simple. "Here's what we're going to do," Dave said, standing back up and moving to the center of the archive floor. "Tonight, we're not practicing whistling. We're practicing visualization. Close your eyes." Xyrath did as instructed, though he felt a bit silly. "Now, breathe like I taught you. Deep, from the diaphragm. Feel that warmth in your chest." Dave's voice was calm and steady, almost hypnotic. "Good. Now imagine that warmth is a light. A small flame, maybe golden or orange or whatever color feels right to you. Don't force it. Just picture it there, breathing with you." Xyrath imagined a small golden flame nestled somewhere behind his ribs, pulsing gently with each breath. "Now, when you breathe out, imagine that flame traveling up," Dave continued. "Not being pushed, not being forced. Just flowing naturally, like water finding its path. Up through your chest, into your throat, and out through your mouth. It wants to move. You're just showing it the way." They practiced this visualization for over an hour. Sometimes Xyrath would lose focus and have to start over. Sometimes the panic would creep back in and Dave would have to talk him back down. But slowly, steadily, the image became clearer. The flame felt more real. And that warmth in his chest seemed to respond to his imagination, growing stronger when he pictured it clearly. "Tomorrow," Dave said as they finally wrapped up for the night, "when you're standing in that arena, I want you to forget about everything else. Forget about your father, forget about the nobles watching, forget about Karvith and his perfect fire. Just focus on that flame inside you. Breathe deep, find that flow we've practiced, and let the fire do what it wants to do naturally." "What if I can't?" Xyrath asked one more time, hating how small his voice sounded. Dave put a hand on Xyrath's shoulder, something he'd never done before. The gesture was warm and solid and real. "Then you can't. But at least you'll know you tried with everything you had. And honestly, kid, I think you're going to surprise everyone tomorrow. Including yourself." That night, Xyrath couldn't sleep. He lay in his royal chambers, staring at the ceiling, practicing the breathing exercises over and over. Visualizing that golden flame, imagining it flowing through him like Dave had described. Somewhere around midnight, he actually felt heat in his throat, real heat that made him cough in surprise. It was there. The fire was really there. He just had to trust himself enough to let it out. The morning of the challenge arrived cold and grey, as if the weather itself was reflecting Xyrath's mood. As he made his way to the ceremonial arena, servants and nobles alike watched him with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. None of them believed he had a chance. Why would they? He'd failed 3 times already in front of the Council of Flames. But as Xyrath walked through those ancient corridors, he thought about Dave's steady patience, about hours of practice in dusty archives, about a human who saw potential where everyone else saw failure. And for the first time in his life, Xyrath walked toward a challenge not with dread, but with something that felt almost like readiness. The ceremonial arena was packed with more spectators than Xyrath had ever seen. Word had spread across the sector about the Cold Prince's challenge, and it seemed like everyone wanted to witness the historic moment when House Drakmoi fell. Dragon nobles filled the prime viewing platforms, their scales gleaming in the morning light. Diplomats from a dozen different species occupied the upper galleries. Even common citizens had gathered in the standing sections, eager for the spectacle. Xyrath stepped onto the ancient stone floor, his claws clicking against rock that had witnessed thousands of such challenges over the centuries. The arena seemed to amplify every sound, every whisper from the crowd. He could hear them placing bets on how quickly he would lose, speculating about which house would claim Drakmor territory after his inevitable failure. Prince Karvith stood on the opposite side of the arena, looking every bit the confident victor he expected to be. His crimson scales were polished to perfection, and flames already flickered at the corners of his mouth like he couldn't quite contain his power. He was everything Xyrath wasn't, everything a dragon prince should be. The crowd cheered when Karvith raised his wings in a dramatic display. From the royal observation platform, King Varoth sat like a statue carved from stone. His face showed nothing, revealed nothing. He'd already mourned the loss of his territory, already accepted his fate. Looking at his son seemed to cause him physical pain, so he simply didn't look. Elder Morvax stepped forward to officiate the challenge, his ancient voice carrying across the arena without need for amplification. The rules were simple and brutal. Each prince would demonstrate their fire-breathing mastery. The one who showed superior control and power would be declared the victor. There would be no second chances, no do-overs. Just one moment to prove worth or accept defeat. Xyrath scanned the crowd, looking for one particular face. He found Dave standing in the servants' section, tucked between kitchen staff and maintenance workers. The human looked completely out of place among all the formal grandeur, still wearing his simple work uniform. But when their eyes met, Dave gave him a small nod and the slightest smile. It wasn't much, but somehow it was everything. "Prince Karvith of House Scorchwind," Elder Morvax announced. "You may demonstrate your mastery." Karvith didn't hesitate. He reared back, his chest expanding as he drew in a massive breath. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Then Karvith unleashed a torrent of fire that was absolutely magnificent. The flames were deep red-orange, roaring like a living thing as they shot across the arena floor. The heat was so intense that spectators in the front rows had to shield their faces. Karvith held the stream for a full 15 seconds, showing perfect control and seemingly endless reserves of power. When he finally stopped, the stone floor where his fire had struck was glowing red with residual heat. Scorch marks traced the path of the flames, smoking gently in the morning air. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. It was a textbook demonstration, exactly what dragon nobility expected to see. Karvith turned to Xyrath with a smug expression that said everything without words. "Beat that, Cold Prince. We both know you can't." "Prince Xyrath of House Drakmor," Elder Morvax called out, his tone already heavy with resigned disappointment. You may demonstrate your mastery. The arena fell silent. This was the moment everyone had come to see. The moment the Cold Prince would fail one final time and lose everything. Xyrath could feel thousands of eyes on him, could feel the weight of their expectations, their judgment, their certainty that he would embarrass himself. His throat felt tight. His chest felt constricted. The old panic started creeping in, that familiar sensation of everything inside him seizing up and shutting down. For a moment, Xyrath thought he might actually run, might just turn and flee the arena rather than face another public humiliation. Then he heard it. Faint but unmistakable. Someone in the servants section was whistling. Just a few notes, barely audible over the ambient noise of the crowd. But Xyrath knew that tune. It was Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, the first song Dave had taught him. Xyrath looked toward the servants section again. Dave wasn't watching with pity or concern. He was just standing there calmly, whistling their song like he had complete faith in what was about to happen. Like failure wasn't even a possibility he was considering. Something inside Xyrath shifted. He closed his eyes and shut out the crowd, shut out his father's disappointment, shut out Karvatha's smugness and the elders' low expectations. He focused on Dave's whistling, on weeks of patient practice in dusty archives, on breathing exercises and simple earth songs and a human who never once treated him like he was broken. Deep breath from the diaphragm, just like Dave taught him. Fill from the bottom up, not shallow but deep and complete. Xyrath felt his lungs expand, felt air flowing into spaces that had been constricted for so long. As he breathed in, he pictured that golden flame in his chest, the one he'd been visualizing every night. It was there, warm and alive, pulsing with his heartbeat. He shaped his mouth the way he would for whistling. Positioned his tongue just right. Created that channel for air to flow through, smooth and controlled. All those hours of practice, thousands of attempts, muscle memory built one patient session at a time. His body knew what to do now. He just had to trust it. Xyrath thought about the warmth he felt every time he whistled, that heat that built in his throat when he held a long note. That wasn't separate from dragon fire. It was the same thing, just waiting for permission to be what it really was. He didn't need to force it or command it. He just needed to let it flow, to guide it the way Dave had taught him. As Xyrath began to exhale, he pictured that golden flame traveling up from his chest. Not being pushed but flowing naturally, like water finding its path downstream. Up through his chest, into his throat, moving with his breath, moving with intention. The fire that erupted from Xyrath's mouth was unlike anything anyone in that arena had ever seen. It wasn't the typical red-orange of standard dragon flames. Xyrath's fire burned blue-white, the color of the hottest part of a flame, pure and intense and beautiful. But what made it truly extraordinary was the sound. As the fire streamed out, it whistled. It actually whistled, creating a haunting, musical resonance that echoed through the arena like a song made of flame. The fire didn't just shoot forward in a brutal display of power like Karvatha's had. It danced. It spiraled and wove through the air with precision and grace, controlled down to the finest detail. Xyrath guided it with the same subtle adjustments he'd learned for whistling, tiny changes in pressure and flow that made the flame respond like a living extension of himself. He held it for 20 seconds, longer than Karvath, and it never wavered. The blue-white fire sang its whistling song the entire time, a sound that was both fierce and somehow gentle, powerful and controlled. When Xyrath finally closed his mouth and let the flame die, the silence in the arena was absolute. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They were all too stunned to react. Then Prince Karvath did something that shocked everyone almost as much as Xyrath's fire had. He bowed. It was a deep, formal bow of genuine respect and concession. "I yield," Karvath said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "That was? I've never seen anything like that. The challenge is yours, Prince Xyrath." The arena erupted. Not in polite applause but in genuine, thunderous celebration. Dragon nobles who had mocked Xyrath for months were on their feet, roaring their approval. Diplomats from other species were gesturing excitedly to each other, already spreading word of what they'd just witnessed. Even the common citizens in the standing sections were cheering like they'd just seen history being made. Because they had. Elder Morvax looked like he'd just watched the sun rise in the west. His ancient eyes were wide with wonder as he raised his wings for silence. Prince Xyrath of House Drakmar has demonstrated mastery of fire beyond question. The challenge is decided. House Drakmar's territory remains secure. Xyrath looked up at the royal platform. His father was standing now, staring at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. There were tears streaming down King Varatha's scaled face, something Xyrath had never seen before. The king's expression held shock and pride and relief and joy all mixed together. But Xyrath barely noticed. He was already pushing through the crowd of nobles who wanted to congratulate him, dodging diplomats who wanted to speak with him, ignoring the sudden surge of people who now wanted to be associated with the prince they'd mocked just minutes before. He found Dave still standing in the servants' section, looking proud but not at all surprised. "You left early," Xyrath said, slightly out of breath from pushing through the crowd. "You didn't stay to watch." Dave shrugged, that familiar easy smile on his face. "Didn't need to. I already knew you had it in you, kid. Been knowing it for weeks." Xyrath felt his throat tighten with emotion, but this time it had nothing to do with fire or fear. "I couldn't have done this without you. You know that, right? All those Dragonfire masters with their ancient techniques couldn't help me, but a human janitor with whistling lessons could. How does that make any sense?" "Maybe it makes perfect sense," Dave said thoughtfully. "Maybe you just needed someone who saw you as a person first and a prince second. Someone who didn't care about dragon traditions or royal expectations. Someone who could teach you that the best way to control fire is to stop trying to control it at all." They stood there for a moment while chaos swirled around them. Then Dave gestured toward a quiet corner of the servants' section. "Come on, let's get out of this mob. I've got 20 minutes left on my break, and I know a nice quiet archive where we could celebrate properly." "How would we celebrate?" Xyrath asked, following him. "How else?" Dave grinned. "We whistle. I've been working on teaching you happy birthday next. Figure you've earned it." As they walked together through the palace corridors, away from the cheering crowds and the political implications and the suddenly fawning nobles, Xyrath realized something important. The fire had always been inside him. The power, the potential, all of it was there from the beginning. He just needed someone to teach him that strength wasn't about force or control or living up to impossible expectations. Sometimes strength was just about breathing deep, trusting yourself, and letting go. And sometimes the most important teachers came from the most unexpected places, wearing janitor uniforms and whistling earth songs in forgotten archives, seeing possibilities where everyone else saw failure.